We all have hopes, dreams, goals, and aspirations. And though the formula and the path for achieving them isn't usually straight and narrow, we can always look to the accomplishments of others for inspiration to continue our pursuit. Hi, I'm 𝗟𝗲𝘁'𝘀𝗀𝘀. Listen, life is full of ups and downs and twists and turns. In fact, there's a line in the movie Forrest Gump where the main character by the same name says, "Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." You know what? He was right. As you seek to gain a better handle on your processes, build your all-star team, and invest in the right technologies, you'll inevitably encounter unexpected obstacles that can undermine you, your brand, and your business. That's why having a strong mindset, unwavering ethics, and a solid family foundation is critical to your success. We can't go it alone. Study the path of any successful person in business, and you'll find that to be true. And our VIP guest today is no different. In the spirit of Frank Sinatra, she did it her way, unapologetically. This is season 12, episode 150. And it's dedicated to Mr. Scotty, Shelly Archambeau's husband. Let's start the show.
Welcome to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues of fast-growing businesses. If you're a business owner or operator looking for practical tips and solutions to scaling your business in a sustainable manner, you're in the right place. Now here's your hostess, 𝗟𝗟𝗁𝘀𝘀𝘀𝘀.
This season, we're discussing two areas, diversity and digital transformation, that no doubt impact the future of not only the way we work, but also the way we operate our businesses. And joining us today from Mountain View, California, I am extremely honored to welcome Shellye Archambeau. She's one of the first African-American female CEOs of a high-tech company in Silicon Valley. Not only that, Shellye scaled MetricStream from a fledgling organization into a global powerhouse. And one of her most recent accomplishments is the publication of her book, which Facebook's COO Sheryl Sandberg describes as a quote-unquote celebration of women knowing their power. It was also featured as one of the best business books of 2020 by Fortune. And the name of Shellye's book is entitled Unapologetically Ambitious. Take risks, break barriers, and create success on your own terms. And what we're going to do for about the next hour is discuss important lessons, strategies, as well as tips from the book that you can apply to your company. So without any further ado, Shellye, welcome to the show. It is such an honor. How are you?
Oh, thank you. I've been looking forward to participating, Alicia, and I'm doing great, actually.
That's awesome. You know, I first learned about you, Shellye, shamefully, when I heard about your book. And your book launched toward the end of 2020, correct? Like around October?
That's correct. Okay. Yeah, that's right.
And you know what's so funny? A friend of mine told me about your book. He said, you have to get it. I said, okay. I trust him. Whatever he recommends something, I'm usually on it. And I immediately went onto Amazon. I ordered your book. And when I saw your last name, I immediately thought you were from Louisiana. Because that's
that's common.
Right. And that's where I'm from. And so as I started reading, the introduction and you were talking about where, your family, I remember reading a part of the book about the genealogy of your family. And I was like, okay. So there definitely is French involved, but Louisiana was kind of bypassed in your story. But, Shellye, I must tell you, it's rare these days when I'm able to sit down and read a book cover to cover without giving into the distractions of life and running a business. And I must say, I could not put your book down. As a reader, you took me on this incredible journey that you've had as you embarked on your goal of becoming a CEO, which you did do successfully by the time you were 40 years old. So I'm wondering if we can actually start with a timeline of how you actually got there, starting with your education at the Wharton School of Business. Can we start there?
Certainly. But first, just let me tell you how honored I am that you that you enjoyed the book and you found it something that you couldn't put down. And that's wonderful to hear. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, absolutely.
So with regards to starting out, yeah, I decided early that I wanted to run a company, not because I knew exactly what a CEO did, but because I had a guidance counselor who said, business is kind of like clubs and organizations. And I was in all the clubs in high school, French Club, American Field Service, right? National Honor Society. Heck, I was even a Girl Scout, but, don't tell anybody. And so when she said, well, clubs are like business, I'm like, well, great. I love running these clubs. So I'll go run a business. And it was literally that naive and audacious, but that then became the goal. So yes, I went to Wharton because I wanted to go to the top business school. When I looked at who are the CEOs, they didn't look like me. And therefore I'm like, all right, the odds aren't in my favor yet again. So I've got to figure out, how do I improve the odds? And I figured having the best credentials I could have was one key step. So that's what took me to Wharton. And then I'd heard that if you are involved and join companies that are in industries that are growing, then your company most likely will be growing. And growing companies never have enough resource. So if you're good at what you do, you can have more opportunities to move ahead faster. And I was like, okay, because I was pretty ambitious, obviously. So I said, great. And back in the early 80s, it was all about tech. So I said, super, I'll join tech. And then I was like, all right, so what do CEOs in tech do, right? What were their career paths? And I picked IBM because it was the Apple or Google, whatever of its day. And so very prestigious company. Said, great, I'll join IBM and just become CEO of IBM.
This is as easy as that, right? Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah, I mean, it was just really, like I said, kind of audacious and like, all right, here's something. It was naive, but that's it's okay. So I looked at all the CEOs at IBM, and every single one of them started out in sales.
Yes.
And I went, oh, well, I don't know what the big deal is about sales, but obviously it's the path to power. So I'm going to go join sales. And, I'll be candid. At the time, a bunch of people thought I was crazy. What do you mean? You're graduating from Wharton and you're going to sell computers? I mean, that's not what Wharton grads do, right? Wharton graduates, they go off to be like investment bankers and P&G product managers and international financial analysts. And I mean, all these cool, sexy, right? Great jobs. And you're going to go sell something? What? So I went against the grain, but I started out in sales. And I'll be candid, just a quick side note. I leverage to this day more of the skills and experiences I had as a salesperson than any other in my career. You learn so much. No wonder so many people in leadership start out in sales. So at any rate, but that's what I did. And then I proceeded to work my way up the ladder at IBM. And I did well. I got to the point where I was the first African-American female sent on an international executive assignment. I was over in Japan. I was running a multi-billion-dollar division. My boss reported to Lou Gerstner, the CEO. So I'd done well, and nobody above me looked like me. It became kind of clear, unfortunately, that, what, despite all that I've done, I don't think I'm really going to get the chance to compete for CEO. So I decided that I needed to leave. Really tough, hard decision. I was basically born and raised at IBM, and it was hard to leave. But that was the right thing to do to actually go after my goal. So I worked my way ultimately to Silicon Valley with a stopover at Blockbuster.com in the late 90s as president of Blockbuster.com. I was the chief marketing officer and EVP of sales of a couple of public companies, and then got my opportunity to be CEO of a very broken company that we managed to turn around over a decade or so into a global market leader called MetricStream. And now I passed that baton a couple of years back, and now I serve on public boards and advise companies and universities, coach CEOs, and try to spend time on my passion projects.
When you mentioned how much you've leveraged your experiences working in sales when you were at IBM, I have in the footnotes, well, kind of in the margins of my copy of your book that I have, I wrote a note to myself this is what Dr. Mendak used to always tell us. And Dr. Mendak was a marketing professor that I had when I was in business school. And he used to always tell us, he taught a global marketing course. And he would always say, if you want to get a career in marketing, start off in sales. And of course, nobody, to your point, like, I don't want to start at the bottom. No, we want the sexy jobs with the fancy titles. Are you kidding me? And, we were all MBA students. So most of us were already working, and we were like, the thought of being where we currently were when we were in school and then having to basically be demoted down to a salesperson, like it was not sexy or appealing to us at all. So I definitely remember reading that part in your book, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is what he tried telling us. And, just another quick side note, something else that I've noticed, Shellye, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. I remember I was in a networking group several years ago, and several of the people who were in my group were in sales. And one day we all just decided to share what our degrees were in. And most of them had degrees in psychology, which I thought was fascinating. Did you take a lot of psychology courses? Or was that also your experience, when you were working in sales and you had your peers that you were working with? Did you have backgrounds in psychology?
That's fascinating. No, not that I noticed, actually.
Hmm.
And I didn't have I don't think I took any psychology classes. So no, I didn't notice that as a theme.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, just
interesting.
just a little quick side note. And something else, you were, as you walked us through that timeline, starting off really studying what it would take to become a CEO of a publicly traded company, and then taking us on a very quick journey through, your career's timeline. But something else that I remember reading in your book was, the CEO, we think that that's the top level, but it's actually when you become a board member. And I thought that was so interesting. And I can't remember exactly where I saw this in your book, but I was like, you know what? She's right, because board members have the power to dethrone the CEO.
Yeah, well, it was funny. You know what? It was funny. So here's what happened. I was probably in my early 30s
Mhm.
before I really was made aware of this board of directors. I mean, I knew there was a board of directors, but I didn't really understand what their role was, right? Backgrounds, et cetera. When I realized, it was like, oh, wait a minute. You mean the board of directors hires and fires the CEO? I want that job. It's like, okay. So I put that on my list of, okay, that's the next aspiration, get to become a CEO and then become a board member.
Now, I'd like to, if we could pivot the conversation just a little bit, because you went through that. And one thing that became very clear to me from the very beginning as I started reading the book was Shellye is no doubt a planner. There is no doubt about it, which is very admirable. But one thing I thought about, and especially during the time period that you were making all of these moves, was, wow, your dad actually worked at IBM, correct?
He did. He did.
Yes.
Dad started out fixing, he was in the service side. So he actually started his career fixing typewriters.
Wow. And is it true that he was maybe one of only a handful of Black people at that time at
Oh,
IBM?
yes, for
Was this like
sure.
the late 60s, early 70s?
Actually, a little bit earlier. He joined
Ah,
IBM in the early 60s.
wow. Okay. Oh,
Exactly.
at the
No,
height of the
listen,
civil rights movement.
it was challenging. I mean, he told
Oh.
stories where, once he was sent for training class,
Hmm.
and that was in Lexington, Kentucky. And he gets to Lexington, and it turns out he's not staying where everybody else is staying.
Mm.
All right. And he's the only one that's staying at this particular hotel. And it turns out that where everybody else was staying, because he was Black, he wasn't welcome to stay. He couldn't
Wow.
go to the same restaurants. He couldn't, it was really challenged. So he needed to, and he was uncomfortable when he did go to a restaurant that allowed him in. He felt like he was a pariah. He was treated
Mm.
poorly. And so he said when he went to training, he basically stayed in his room and had room service because it was not,
Wow.
it was not welcoming. So yeah, he was definitely a pioneer as it related to breaking some of those new barriers.
Absolutely. And so fast forward, I think when you started at IBM, was it the early 80s, mid 80s?
I actually started full time with IBM in 1984. I was
Okay.
working for them part time while I went to Wharton. So I started a few years
Yes.
earlier part time.
And so had much changed in terms of the makeup, I guess, of the staff
Oh,
at
it
IBM?
definitely had changed.
Okay.
I give IBM a lot of credit. IBM definitely leaned in towards diversity.
Mhm.
Just like they hired my father in the 60s, they actually were making an focus effort to hire women, to hire people of color. And so when I got there, I mean, no, it's not like there were plenty, right? But
Yes.
there were definitely enough that you didn't feel you were the only one. I started out in sales. Let's see, in my branch office, there was one other Black male salesperson. And I remember one Black systems engineer, and there was myself. So there might have been
Mm.
sales go to market side, maybe, three, four of us. So no, not a lot out of a branch of 120 people, but it wasn't just one and it wasn't none.
Mm. So you obviously spent how many years was it at IBM?
I
Was it
spent 14, yeah, about 14
14?
years.
Wow. Okay. So when you eventually left IBM and then you went on to become president at Blockbuster, was it something similar, Shelley? Did you still see some type of representation of different types of people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities? Or was the makeup pretty much the same as you moved from organization to organization, from IBM to, Blockbuster? I know there was North Point
Yeah, right.
Communications.
North Point, Loud Cloud.
Hmm.
Honestly, there was still few and far between,
Okay.
especially as it related to people in, leadership at the executive level, right, et cetera. Still few and far between.
Mm. And there's this beautiful story that you tell in your book about when you and your family did relocate to Japan when you accepted that position. And you mentioned having some of your PowerPoint slides. I think there was a really important presentation or meeting that you were preparing for, and
Yes.
you actually had some of your presentation slides translated into Japanese. Can you talk a little bit more about that story? I thought it was so cool because you broke through that invisible barrier that we all know is there, but it's kind of like the elephant in the room. Like we all know it's there, but nobody really wants to address it. So I'd love if you could share with our, listeners right now what that, more about that story.
Definitely. And just a bit of the backdrop so you understood what I was getting myself into. This was it was the late 90s, or actually mid to late 90s. This is probably 97, 98, right? Kind of time frame.
Hmm.
And as I got ready to take this job, I was the first Black woman that was being sent overseas. And I'm going to Japan, which is a very homogenous place. My boss that I am leaving is trying to give me a pep talk, right? He says, Shelley, how much you know of being successful in Japan? And I'm like, oh, not much. So please, I'm all ears. Tell me, right? He said, okay, there are three things that are important to being successful in business in Japan. Great. I'm all ears. Got my pad, right? And he says, number one, wisdom. Wisdom means age. I didn't have that. I was in my mid 30s. So no gray hair, did not, right? I was not in my 40s and 50s have that wisdom. Okay, fine, no wisdom. Second is being male. And I'm like, what? I'm 0 for 2. All right.
Mm.
So then he says the third is intelligence. He said, Shelley, you only have one going for you. You better figure out how to maximize it. And I was like, what? That's my send-off speech. Anyway, so I get to Japan, but here's what nobody realized. And I didn't even realize until I was actually in the thick of it. I had been a minority or have been a minority in business my entire career.
Mm.
So therefore, how I approach new situations is very different from someone who's not been a minority. I know walking in the door to a new situation, people are going to underestimate me. They're going to think that perhaps I'm there for reasons other than my skills and capability. And as a woman, right, I'm not going to get the benefit of the doubt from a leadership standpoint. I'm going to have to prove it. I mean, all these things that I just, I don't even have a list. It's just kind of ingrained in me. So therefore, I always start things the same way. I use a servant leader approach. I focus on the team and trying to make the team successful, right? Help them do what they need to do. If they're successful, I'll be successful. That builds loyalty, etc. I show I care. I mean, I just have all these things I do. Okay. So I get to Japan and I start executing like I always execute. Well, you know what? I actually was able to be successful pretty quickly. And the PowerPoint is a perfect example because here I was. I took over a division that wasn't doing well. So we need to make changes. And yes, the senior Japanese people, they speak good English, but the rank and file, I mean, they learned it in school, but it's kind of like us learning French and Spanish in school. That doesn't mean we can speak it or understand it when somebody's, is talking it all the time, right? So I said, all right, I want to make sure they understand because we have stuff we have to do. So that's why I put it in Japanese, because I know what I wanted to say, but I want to make sure they knew what I was trying to say. So it was that approach. It was that approach of focusing on how do I help the team be successful? I'm going to optimize for the team versus optimizing for me. Well, what I learned and what I tell people is, hey, if you've been successful as a minority, whether it's a person of color or a woman in business in the States, go do an international assignment because you actually have an advantage that you don't even realize. Because other people walking into that experience, it's the first time they've been a minority and they don't get it. Why aren't people listening to me? Why won't they just do what I tell them to go do, right? It takes time for them to get themselves situated.
Yes.
Because they're used to everything that they've done coming with them.
Great point. And that's something that I've also noticed whenever I've had to work on some international projects or assignments. My transition is not nearly as, I don't have the culture shock, I think, that a lot of my peers who don't necessarily look like me might have. And which brings me, this is such a great segue to another question that I wanted to ask you, Shellye, based on reading your story in your book. And at one point, I remember reading something very specifically about you knowing that feeling of always being quote unquote different, but succeeding anyway. And I'm wondering, what does diversity, in your opinion, look like in the workplace? Because for some people, it could just be gender based, it could be from an ethnicity standpoint. There's some factors that we don't normally even take into consideration. For example, when it comes to disabilities or abilities, physical capabilities, what does it truly mean to have a diverse workforce in the year 2021, in your opinion?
Yes, a diverse workforce to me, I use the broadest definition, which is a diverse workforce means that you have a whole range of people with various racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, cultural, backgrounds, different lifestyles, different experiences, interests, maybe religious. I mean, it's the more diversity is a scale. It's not a yes, no, right? It's a scale. So you can have a diverse organization. You can have a very diverse organization, right? You can have it because you can be diverse on some elements, but not on others. So to me, diversity is a spectrum. And the most diverse has the biggest variety and range of people working together.
Yes, absolutely. And so it's interesting hearing you refer to diversity as both a scale as well as a spectrum, because something that I've noticed, this was actually a conversation that I had about 2 months ago. I was participating in this online event, and there was a lady who has a staffing company, and she said, Alicia, these companies should just be beating down your door because I have a client right now, and I won't name that client because it's a very large banking client that she had. And she said, their goal is by the year 2022 to have at least, I think it was like 40% women and I think 8% African Americans or something like that. I may not have those percentages exact, but
right.
It made me wonder, like, why do we look at these things as percentages? And can companies and leaders of companies get themselves into trouble when they start looking at, such hard and fast percentages instead of truly focusing on the way you just described it, that making sure, you have that scale, that you have that spectrum, that you are being as inclusive as possible. And I would imagine that if you are truly being as inclusive as possible in your recruiting efforts, And maybe this is just me being naive, but you wouldn't have to necessarily worry about meeting an exact percentage. Does that
Actually,
even
I think
make sense?
I actually think you need both. And
Okay.
let me explain why. How do you know what good is if you don't
Mm.
have a target or a measure? How do you know what good is? You might run down a track and think, "Hey, I ran well. I ran fast." But you don't know if you actually did until you know, well, how are others running, right? Or did you really run as fast as you can run? And how do you know that unless you're actually timing yourself, right? And then see what happens if you actually strengthen your legs and do and now run. Now, how are you running? So to me, in order to determine any kind of performance, you have to put some kind of measure on it. And in business, we measure everything that's important. We measure revenue growth, we measure profitability, we
Mm.
measure customer churn, we measure customer satisfaction, we measure employee satisfaction. Why do we measure those things? If we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, right? It should all be good. But we don't know that the actions that we're taking are actually effective. And that's why we need to measure, right?
Mm.
So, and when
Got
it
it.
comes to diversity, I see the same thing. If it really is important, we should have metrics, and then we should see how are we doing against these metrics. Are the policies we have in place, are the practices that we're doing, are the onboarding, is the recruiting, is the whatever it is, are they effective? And if we're not measuring, then we just say we think so, and then we wonder over time why. Well, gosh, the numbers actually aren't moving. We actually aren't as diverse as we had hoped. So I believe it's important to actually set targets. And I believe it is important to measure because we set targets in business on everything that is important. And if diversity is truly important, we should have targets for diversity and we should be measuring against it.
Well said. And, I love that because I'm totally an operations person, so I'm always thinking about KPIs, and I'm glad you said it that way because you've opened my eyes to even shamefully, even me at being as metric driven as I am, I didn't see it in that way. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, something else that I kept thinking about you, Shelley, as I was reading your book is, does she have a crystal ball? Because you just seem to have this this knack for looking into the future. And maybe it is part of you just, keeping your eyes and ears open and being receptive and reaching out to people. I know you talk a lot about mentorship and when you need help, make sure you open your mouth and ask questions. But it reminded me of something else. When I remember when I was an engineering student in college, a lot of my classmates started dropping out of engineering school and they were picking up these majors like information systems and management information systems, decision sciences. And I'm like, what is that? I didn't see the tech, like they saw something that I didn't see. And here we are now. So the fact that you saw the technology boom when you did, I mean, again, it's so admirable. When it comes to digital transformation, especially after what happened last year with the COVID-19 pandemic and so many companies, you already have that very strong high-tech background. But for those companies that did not already have a significant amount of their operations digitized, they were just destroyed. So I'm wondering if we could now start to talk just a little bit more about that digital transformation piece. So, something else, I have another quote here from your book. Something that you mentioned is as more people resort to digital communication, your ability to socialize in person may become an advantage. Can you describe what you mean by that and why it is so important that if you can have that face to face interaction with someone, that you should always try to do that if it's possible?
Yeah. What I find is what face to face and in person allows you to do is to make a stronger connection because three-dimensional person is just more complete than a two-dimensional person, right? A two-dimensional
Mm,
person is a face you see on a screen, but you're not seeing everything. You don't see the full body language. Therefore you don't see the full communication that's happening or going on. Connection can be a little harder. When you're in person, the energy you can almost feel. It's hard to feel those things in two-dimensional. And people don't remember, Maya Angelou, right? People don't remember what you say. People don't remember what you do, but they remember how you make them feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I just believe a personal connection gives you the ability to create a deeper feeling, which will then create a deeper memory and therefore relationship that you can build on. Even if you see somebody just once and every other interaction is phone, video, whatever, that's fine. But the fact you have that as a base is important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just about everybody can think through people that they've had a chance to meet in person and then gone on, right, to not. I have a friend to this day. My goodness, how old's my son? My son is 32 years old. We've been friends since before my son was born. And every time we get on the phone, even though she lives across country, we don't see each other very much at all. We're right back where we were.
Mm.
And I don't care if it's 6 months, 8 months, whatever, we get on the phone, and we're right back. Well, it's hard to have that kind of depth of connection just having met somebody only on a Zoom or only on a conference call. And a network, a true network, is nothing more than a set of relationships. And, I define a network as comprised of people who will do something for you when it's not convenient.
Mm.
Right? It's not how many business cards I have. So building that takes intention. And I believe if you have the ability, again, it's the if. Sometimes you don't. So you do the best you can for sure. But if you have the ability to meet people in person, always take that opportunity.
Because you're so good at looking at trends and kind of predicting where things are going in terms of business, do you foresee, Shellye, companies continuing with mostly remote operations, or maybe instituting some type of a hybrid approach where employees still have some flexibility to work from home if they'd like? And this is considering once things fully open up again for us as a country here in the US. What are your thoughts about that? Because it's been very interesting for me personally, starting work with new clients, having never had any type of face-to-face interaction first. It's different. We're making it happen, but it's still different. And I think it ties into everything that you just said. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? In terms of where you see companies, and when I say companies, I mean some of these larger high-tech companies. Where do you see going with that?
Yeah, I think there's going to be very few companies that have the same number of people coming to the office every day post-COVID as pre-COVID. I just don't see it. I think it'll be a hybrid.
Okay.
Couple reasons. One, employees. I mean, many want to get back in the office. We want to see each other. We want to interact. We want absolutely. But at the same time, we also want flexibility. This has been hard for sure, but there's also been a number of advantages that people have learned. They've learned that, I can be productive and I can actually handle more things as a result of actually being home, right? So not that they want to be home all the time, but a day a week, 2 days a week, I think people want that. More, and businesses have learned, you know what? Business doesn't stop just because people are actually working remotely.
Mm-hmm.
We can get things done. And so employees want this, then we can figure out how to make this work, especially in an environment where it's hard to hire people.
Yes.
So when you're in an environment, it's hard to hire people. You have to do things that are going to attract people and retain people. And so if I'm not going to be flexible, but company B is going to be flexible, who's going to have a better opportunity to hire the best talent? Company B. I personally believe that there'll be much more hybrid in the overall approach than there has been before, for sure. And I do think there are some jobs out there that won't be going back into the office. So it's going to be more of that. I think it'll be the rarity of companies that have everybody back in the office every day, just like normal.
And, one other major benefit is for those of us who live in large metropolitan areas, not having to deal with the traffic.
Oh, listen, and that was part of the productivity. Think about it. I mean, that was absolutely part of the productivity that people have experienced and that they still want, was just that. It's like, oh, wait a minute. If I'm not commuting 2 hours a day, look how much more I can get done. And that's a personal statement and a professional statement. I mean, companies saw, the first like 4 months of COVID, every company saw an increase in productivity,
Mm.
which was a shock. And I
Yes.
think a big piece of that was just that. One, you don't have any commute. So what are you doing with that time? Okay, I'll get it done. Two, people weren't taking care of themselves. So they were working too much because you didn't
Yeah.
have boundaries anymore. Right. I mean, if anything, many companies saw, at least in the beginning, you had to just figure out ways to get people to stop working.
Mm.
So this whole notion of I'm working remote and suddenly I'm not working, I think they've realized that, hey, people actually do work.
Yes. And speaking of that increase in productivity, again, going through whatever a digital transformation looks like across all of these different companies, having those different technologies to facilitate that hybrid approach
Oh,
is
absolutely.
also, yes, is also very critical. And speaking of transformations, what happened at MetricStream under your leadership as CEO is nothing short of amazing. Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, described you as, and I quote, the woman who pulled off the most incredible Silicon Valley turnaround you never heard of. Now, that is something to say. So, I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit more about that, but from a business infrastructure perspective. And if you're listening to this show for the first time, business infrastructure is a system for linking your people, your processes, and your tools and technologies to ensure that growth happens in a profitable and sustainable way. Okay, so without divulging any trade secrets or intellectual property, can you share with us, Shelley, how you were able to, again, study trends and develop a strategy with your leadership team to grow this company from, I think I read somewhere 45 people to over 1,000 employees? Can we start with the people element of business infrastructure first? How did you develop your leadership team and ultimately get things done?
It really starts first with creating a value proposition and an organization that people actually want to be a part of.
Mm.
So that's the first step. And that was my biggest challenge. I walked into the company was called Zaplet. That was the original name of the company, is called Zaplet. And they were struggling. They built some amazing technology, but they had, in my opinion, fallen in love with their product. And when you fall in love with your product, you put yourself at huge risk that you will basically miss the market. And that's exactly what happened. They had this terrific product that nobody wanted.
Mm.
It's so important to actually fall in love with the market, because when you fall in love with your product, I mean, nobody can tell you your baby is ugly.
Right.
Nobody can tell you, no, no, your baby is perfect. You just haven't seen her in the right light. Look at that cute smile, right? Look at your babies. People give you any, oh, I'm a little concerned. Oh, no, your baby is perfect. Well, when you fall in love with your product becomes like your baby. And people, you can't even hear the feedback. Oh, no, you just you just don't know how to use it right. Oh, no, you just haven't spent enough time, right? Da, 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 da. I mean, you become defensive. You're like, of course your product's perfect. It's the client that doesn't get it, right? No.
Mm.
The key is you want to fall in love with the market, because when you fall in love with the market, you do everything in your power to nurture the market, to make sure you understand the market, to meet all of its needs, to anticipate what its problems might be, right? Because you want to be there to. So if you take this whole concept of falling in love with the market, you need to, first of all, figure out what your market is. Who is your market? So I needed to find for metrics for Zaplet, right? I need to figure out for Zaplet, who is our market? What is the problem we're going to solve? And for who? And that was a huge question and challenge. And to solve that, I just went out to talk to some of the smartest people. Talk about me being able to spot trends. I will tell you, no, there's nothing special about me. What I do is I try to find the smartest people I know and talk to them. I try to read, a lot. I try to do all these things to learn from others who have much broader perspectives than I do, and then just piece it all together. So I just went out there to talk to some of the smartest people. I'm like, all right, who do you know that really follows trends, right? Who do you think I should talk to? Here's what I'm trying to do. Blah, blah. And literally, I spent like months out there talking, interacting with people to say, what is a big problem that businesses have that's not being solved right now? And I didn't ask people what I should do with the company. I just want to find out a problem. Because if I can figure out a problem to solve, fine. Then I can figure out my market, and then I can figure out the product to solve the market's problems. And that's how we came up with the whole compliance and risk thing, was because it's like, all these rules and regulations, companies are struggling under the burden of all these regulations that are coming down with Sarbanes-Oxley. And back then it was WorldCom imploding and all the different rules, and CEOs were struggling. And I'm like, done. We're going to figure out how to help companies manage compliance and risk. And once I had a problem, now I can create a vision. We're building a company that's going to help other organizations manage compliance and risk so they can effectively manage and grow their businesses. Do you want to be a part of that? Right? Also, now I can create a vision. And with a vision, I can start now recruiting people because I can tell them what they're joining and what they're going to be a part of. And what's the big, world problem we're going to solve, and we're going to solve together. And here's what this means for the companies. Here's what it means for us. Here's what it means for you. That's how you start to build your team, because the key is you want to get the best talented people you can find, and hopefully a whole lot smarter than you are. That's how I approached in terms of the team. And fortunately, I had great investors and found a company, MetricStream was their name. They were doing quality and operational compliance things. And so we put the two together because that gave us a little bit of a leg up on how do we get a solution to solve the problem, et cetera. And then from there, we built the company, a person at a time, but all about trying to find the best talent we could to help us deliver against this vision. And ultimately, this vision of compliance and risk became a brand new market category that the Gartner, the industry analyst, named governance, risk, and compliance in 2008. Once that market was defined, we were now named as a leader because we've been doing it. There just wasn't a market, quote, name for it yet. And so once there was, we were a leader, and then companies could find us. And, it all started working pretty well after the financial crisis and trying to live through that. And we had lots of challenges all the way through. So this was not a smooth ride.
Yes.
By any means.
Because you at one point actually gave up your salary for a year, right? Working through the market crash of 2008. Whew, talk about commitment and dedication. So I'm also, as I'm listening to you talk about building the leadership team and setting that foundation and being able to define what the vision is so that you could get people to rally around the vision as well as the mission of this new company. I'm also hearing a process. So, you started off saying, talking about, the importance of creating that value proposition. Who are we solving this problem for? What are the problems that are out there? And doing that firsthand market research by actually picking up the phone, talking to people, meeting with people, gaining as much of that firsthand market research data as possible. And from there, being able to build the vision and recruit people. Something else that I'm wondering, if we look at the process aspect of business infrastructure, I would imagine that delegation would also be a component of that as well. So you assemble this dream team of people around you. Can you talk about the art and the power of delegation, Shellye?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I'm glad you asked about delegation because frankly, delegation is one of the I call it the skills that I see that tends to hold people back from moving into the highest levels of business. Because at the end of the day, when you start your career, it's all about what you do, what you're able to create, how you interact with others, right? What you actually create. As you move up the organization, however, you're going to be judged on not just what you do, but how well you get work done through others in a consistent way, how well you develop others. So if you aren't good at delegating, you're going to get to the point where you get stuck. Because why is delegation important? delegation is important because how you spend your time needs to change. You go from you're the one that does all the work and gets things actually done to, yes, you do some things, but you need to spend time thinking more about strategy, thinking more about the market, thinking more about building relationships, beyond your immediate organization, because you need these relationships to make sure that you can actually support your team, right? And get things done. And if you don't have bandwidth to spend time on those kinds of things, you're not going to be able to participate effectively in conversations and meetings that talk about where should we go, not where are we going, what should we be doing, right? Bringing new ideas. I mean, it's not like this whole notion of a light bulb suddenly goes off. It doesn't unless you spend time thinking. And most people don't have enough time to think. You have to, I can't tell you how often I would talk to people who work for me to say, listen, you need to figure out how to set aside 5-10% of your time just to think. And if you're doing all that time, you're not thinking. So delegating, that skill is super, super and critical to learn how to do. Because if you can't delegate effectively, then you're going to end up either micromanaging or constantly having to fix. And if you're having to do that, then your teams are not going to be as effective. Because if they're reworking, it's going to take them way too long. So I encourage everybody to learn how to delegate.
Absolutely. And just to kind of close out the process portion of this. So, in delegating, obviously I would imagine part of effective delegation also is being able to establish, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, establishing those metrics. What are the goals and what are the metrics that to measure our performance against those goals? So, and course correct wherever necessary. Is that a part of it as well?
That is definitely a part of it. Delegating is basically not assigning a task. If I say, Alicia, you need to go do X, Y, and Z, that's not delegating. You're just being directive. And you, Alicia, aren't learning anything in that process because you're just, okay, do X, Y, and Z. No thought, right? No process, no negotiation, none of that. No. Delegation is, Alicia, we need to accomplish X. And I need you to lead this effort to build a plan on how we're going to accomplish X. And the plan should include these elements, right? So build the plan and let's talk about it. That's delegating, because now you have to think about it. And in that process, you're going to be learning, not just doing.
And it also sounds like you are empowering that other person, and giving those people the autonomy to be able to do their whatever work they've been delegated effectively.
Definitely.
Awesome. I see we're starting to run out of time here. I was so worried this would happen because there's so much more that I wanted to talk to you about. But so I'm being selfish here, but I do want to be respectful of your time. So if we could just very quickly maybe touch on the tools piece of business infrastructure. And so are there certain resources that you recommend, Shellye? Because, again, as I read your book, and I definitely want you to talk more about your book, but, there were certain themes, and I have this whole list here of themes, planning being one of them, work ethic, work-life integration as opposed to work-life balance, the importance of financial literacy, being decisive, making trade-offs as opposed to making sacrifices. That one, I think, resonated with me more than anything. But I'm wondering if, when it comes to understanding trends, you did mention the importance of networking with people and talking to people who are smarter than you. Are there resources or, are there certain websites, certain reports that you could recommend in a general sense that people might be able to take a look at if they are interested in always staying abreast of kind of what's going on out there, not just within your particular industry, but I think across business as a whole?
Yes. And again, I tend to be, what should I say? I tend to be more focused, obviously, on tech, right? In terms of what's happening there. So when you say what resources, et cetera, websites, et cetera, what I would tell you is things like, TechCrunch,
Yes.
Right, is one that, yes, you got to, we soon, it'll tell you what's going on, what's happening, etc. Tech Hive is another one that gets information. Follow, a number of the venture capitalists. Andreessen Horowitz is one that I like to follow. They put out a blog where they cover all kinds of different topics and what's happening. There's Digital Trends, which focuses on, talk about digital transformation, et cetera. That's a good one that talks about things that are going on. And then, some I'll call it old school ones. I still like to read The Economist. I like The Week, which is a news magazine that comes out weekly that basically gives both sides of all issues. Here's what happened. Here's the view from a conservative perspective. Here's the view from a liberal standpoint. Here's the center view. So all these things help me, right, just keep abreast of what's going on and try to understand what's actually happening, not what others think is happening when it comes to what's going on. So those are a few of the things that I would highlight.
And please, we cannot close this interview without you talking more about your book and where can people go to find your book.
Oh, thank you. Yes. So Unapologetically Ambitious, take risks, break barriers, and create success on your own terms. It's available in bookstores, Amazon, right? All those. You can go to Shellye, SHELLYE, myfirstname.com, and absolutely find it there, as well as some other things. And, I'll tell you, I wrote the book because everyone deserves to be ambitious and no one should have to apologize for it. And I wanted to provide the tools, the techniques, the approaches, the hacks, what worked, what didn't work, in terms of improving your odds to get what you want out of life, professionally, for sure, but also personally. Because many of the same skills and tactics and things that you use to be successful professionally also work personally, and vice versa. It's all about being intentional, thinking through what are you trying to achieve in the future and what can you do today that will better prepare you to make that happen. And in doing that, I find you tend to improve your own luck.
Well, I must say, what I found most refreshing about your book is not only do you share your story and talk about what you did, but you literally spell out how you did it. And I know I think it's the last few chapters where you literally say, okay, this is what you need to do.
Yes,
this is how you develop your life plan. Because I'll just be honest with you, it's a personal frustration of mine when I read these books and there's people ranting and raving about them. And then, I kind of walk away like, okay, it was motivational. Maybe it was inspirational, but you didn't tell me how to do this. And so thank you so much for including such detailed information in the book. So I encourage everyone who is listening to this, make sure you go and purchase a copy. I guarantee you won't be able to put it down. And make sure you have, paper and pen ready to take notes, because you can make it happen. All you have to do is just set your goal. And Shellye does a beautiful job of walking you through the steps to take. It's a blueprint. It truly is a blueprint. I know I've seen that word used to describe your book in several different places online, and it's so accurate. It really is a blueprint.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks so much for having me.
Well, that's what I get for trying to cram in a whole lot of information in a relatively short period of time, even though I know for a podcast, an hour is definitely not considered short. But there was so much more information that I know we can all learn from Shellye. So that just means you need to go and purchase her book. Again, the name of it is Unapologetically Ambitious. Take risks, break barriers, and create success on your own terms. You can't miss the book when you find it, because it has a beautiful, bright red color to it. And you'll see Shellye's beautiful picture on the back cover. I do want to touch on just a few things that really stood out for me personally, and it might have also stood out for you as well. First, when we talked about diversity, I thought it was interesting how Shellye described diversity as being both a scale as well as a spectrum. And that when it comes to actually setting specific metrics as it relates to creating a diverse workforce, that it is important to also establish those metrics because otherwise, how will you know how good you're doing or not doing if you don't have a metric to compare your performance against? So it definitely opened my eyes to assigning metrics to having a diverse workforce. Something else that really stood out for me was her definition of a network and her describing a network as the people who will do things for you, even when it's inconvenient for them. Wow, what a powerful definition. I also thought it was interesting when we had the conversation around delegation, when Shellye said, you start your career, and let's say when you start your business, you probably are being the technician, as Michael Gerber describes in his book, The E-Myth. It's all about how good you are at doing the particular work. But as you start to move into that true leadership role, as the true owner of the company, the true founder, you need time to think, and you can't think when you're so busy tinkering with the actual technical work of whatever it is that your company specializes in. So in order to function as a true higher level executive, you do need to master the art of delegation. I also thought it was interesting that Shellye talked about servant leadership being her approach to how she's been able to successfully build teams as well as loyalty, over the years. One other thing that I also thought was important, is when we talked about falling in love with your product and how, your business is your baby and no one wants to be told that their baby is ugly. But you have to beware of falling in love with your product because it more than likely means, as Shellye mentioned, that you're unable to receive feedback. You need to instead fall in love with the market. So, if you thought this interview was filled with nuggets of wisdom, wait until you read the book. We didn't have a chance to talk about it, but I will make sure to put links to several other resources that I jotted down as I read Shellye's book. For example, she talks about Toastmasters. There's an HBR case study about Shellye on becoming a CEO. She also mentioned the Committee of 200, which is another organization that she's a part of. So I'll make sure that we get all of those things captured into the show notes of this episode. If you want more details about Shellye, her book, what she's up to, make sure you follow her at her website. It's shellye.com. That's SHELLYE.com. I can't thank Shellye enough for taking her time out of her very busy schedule. She had to attend a board meeting, but I am so grateful and appreciative of her being able to spend some of her precious time with us here on this show. Make sure you check out businessinfrastructure.tv because that's where you'll see a direct link to purchasing Shellye's book, as well as some of all of these resources that she was able to mention during this interview, but also resources that I extracted from her book as well. Again, the best way to access that information is at businessinfrastructure.tv. And when you get there, just click on the search icon at the very top of the screen, type in Shellye's name, or you can click on the Listen tab in the main menu and select Season 12. There you'll be able to find this interview. You'll also find more information on our sponsors. Supporting them helps us keep this show free for you. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in and for being a loyal subscriber. Remember, stay focused, be encouraged. This entrepreneurial journey is a marathon and not a sprint. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues with 𝗟𝗲𝘁𝘀. If you like what you've heard, do us a favor and subscribe, leave a rating and review, and more importantly, share with your colleagues and team members who could benefit from the information. Join us next week for another episode of Business Infrastructure with 𝗟𝗲𝘁𝘀𝘀.